moving on to our next panel, which is Beyond Sustainability, Climate Tech and Agtech for a Healthier Future. It will explore the transformative potential of the intersection of agriculture, nutrition and sustainability in addressing the climate crisis. I would like to now invite our moderator of the day, Ms. Silvina Dalton, co-founder and technical advisor of DelPlata Green. Our panelists, Mr. Subhadeep Sanyal, partner Omnivore, Ms. Sharan Ghai, research portfolio lead at Earthly, Ms. Bhuvaneswari Balasubramanian, India Country Director, Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition Gain. Thank you.
Sí, estamos listos. Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this panel on emerging technologies in agriculture and their impact on sustainability, food security, and climate change. So, we will have about 30 minutes talking with these three experts on the technological innovations and how they are shaping the future of our agriculture, from mitigating climate change to improving global nutrition. So we will have 5 topics. We'll chat like this, an informal chat. But the 5 topics intend to give you an overview, a comprehensive one, on this issue. So the first topic is emerging technologies. So I'd like for Sharan to let us know what she thinks is the most promising technologies for reducing the carbon footprint of agriculture.
Hi everybody, good evening. First I want to say I'm very honored to be here. I heard someone earlier say that, they're the youngest at the forum. Fortunately that's not me, but looking around I can tell that I'm perhaps a little bit younger than everybody. So just to reiterate, I'm very, very honored to, be speaking to all of you today. Earlier I said, I'm hardly an expert, but I do have a few insights that, I'd be very happy to share. But just, I think to start off, agriculture, as we know, it's more than just an industry. It's more than just a sector. It's the foundation of our civilization. It's what nourishes us. It's what feeds us, and it's been here for eons. It's been here for decades. Unfortunately, over the past few decades since the Industrial Revolution, we've seen soil degradation. We've seen biodiversity loss, and more than that, I think we've seen the global phenomenon that is climate change do irreparable damage to humankind. But I think that's enough of a recap. To start off, this topic. Of course, we know that we're here to talk about climate. We're here to talk about nutrition. 2 really key themes emerge within this topic. One would, of course, be to address agriculture degradation. 2 would be, the 2 themes that emerge would be climate smart technologies, and then of course collaboration for equitable access, which is something that we'll develop upon later today. So speaking on climate smart technologies, as I'm sure you can all see, I have a lot of notes. I'll build upon them a little bit. So I work for Earthly, which is an organization that works with nature-based solutions. And of course we work with a lot of regenerative agricultural farms, with a lot of regenerative agricultural projects also. And the most promising technologies that I've seen arise in the past few years have, of course, I feel like this topic would be incomplete if we don't speak first about AI. I'll get it out of the way and then we can get into the others. So we've seen a lot of the Internet of Things being used in farming today. We've seen predictive technologies come into focus. We've seen people work with technology that is able to predict rainfall pattern. We've been able to see drought prediction. That of course is a major technology that we're working with. We were earlier just now talking about biochar. That's a major I think focus area that's coming in. And then of course there's also the main focus of agriculture today in terms of impact is regenerative agriculture. So we've seen, no-till farming coming up, which is a big technology in itself. It inherently goes against what Indians at least have seen in our space. So we've seen no-till agriculture, we've seen carbon cropping coming up, we've seen, carbon neutral fertilizers, all of that. And then really, I think going back to basics is, of course, innovations within the regenerative agriculture space. We've seen carbon crediting projects come up from these regenerative agriculture projects. And I think, of course, we'll build upon these a little bit, but speaking as an overview, these are large innovations, big technology that we've seen coming up in this space that I think has the ability to drive change, to create an impact.
And when we have those adopting technologies in vulnerable regions, do you think regeneration may be a solution?
Absolutely. I mean, regenerative agriculture, I think, is built for smaller communities. It is built for the smallholders because, I don't want to speak for everybody, but in India, in a lot of countries that where farming is led by smallholders, we've seen that policies and regulations don't necessarily support the people that our food comes from. And we've seen challenges in adoption. We've seen some resistance from the smallholders themselves because of lack of access to education in terms of how to adopt regenerative agricultural practices. So yeah, these are some challenges. And then, of course, even our own governments, our own law-making organizations, they favor, larger scale, more commercial production of food as opposed to food or crops or that would come from smallholders. I think those are the few key challenges that would exist within this space. And without taking up too much time, I think if...
It's okay, we have time for everyone. Thank you so much for the insight. So we have an activity, just recently completed it, which was a workshop, and my table was on climate. So discuss a lot about renewable energies. So maybe Subhadeep can help us. What happens with producers when they want to adopt renewable energies? Do you see any hurdles that they have to overcome? Is it easy for them?
Producers as in growers, farmers?
Yes, as farmers.
Sure, I think, so again, I come from a for-profit universe. We're a venture fund which invests in agriculture, food and climate-related businesses in India, early-stage companies. And I've been doing this the last 14 years of my life as well. But otherwise, I'm an agronomist by training. So I get both these universes. To answer your question specifically, I think any new technology adoption that we have seen, whether it's some of the stuff which Sharan spoke about, IoT or any new kind of sensors, I think the cost of adoption in a country like India, where you have smallholder farming, which is 85% or more, is basically what you need to solve for. You can build great technology, but unless or until you figure out a way to take them to the market in a meaningful way, it doesn't really scale. And that's where financing, leasing, sharing, aggregation, words like these kind of become important. That same journey applies to renewables. So I'll give an example maybe. So EcoZen is a company that we've had the chance to invest in for a very long time. These guys build solar-powered micro cold storage units which can be placed on the farm. So think of a 20-feet container truck, that size of a cold storage unit, 5 to 10 tons, helps with avoiding wastage of horticultural produce once you harvest, and you can time the market as a grower, as a producer. Flowers, fruits, vegetables, any perishables. And it's independent of the grid, doesn't need power, runs purely on solar. So in an ideal world, it should work, right? And it should work easily. And they have worked to bring down the BOM and the cost of the product, etc. The challenge was in scaling. Now, of course, they've moved over the hump. They have more than 2,000 units deployed. But the challenge that they faced for the longest time was, how do you get a group of farmers together or an aggregate of farmers together to start using that in a shared format? Because many a times a 5-tonner or a 10-tonner is quite big for a guy who has half an acre, 1 acre. But if there's a collective, if there is an entrepreneur who kind of buys that capex and then leases out that model, that is where it kind of clicked really well. So then they started to focus on creating these individual entrepreneurs who became cooling entrepreneurs in that sense, right? So, that helped them kind of moved many units down. I would also not take away the role of government here, because for any new technology, many a times in countries like us, that initial risk capital, whether it is through a subsidy, whether it is through a easy loan with a low interest, right? That is often needed to spur the market. A great example is micro irrigation. India today, you'll see drip irrigation, sprinkler irrigation in abundance. It's completely privatized and it's for profit. Farmers understand the value of it. But 30 years ago, when it was introduced, when Netafim came, when Jain irrigation in India started, it was not the case. It took 15 years of continuous education coupled with incentives to get that behavior change. And when an ROI was reached, and when cost of production also became competitive, and it finally came down, it became like a normal. Now it's not high tech anymore, right? If you see farmers who are in horticulture or even otherwise, I think that change is coming. That I've seen sugarcane farmers also adopt to micro irrigation. Now there you need an incentive. You need to tell them why, because otherwise you are exporting water. That's what I say. If India exports water through basmati rice, India exports and consumes water by the amount of sugar that we eat. So I think the net point is, yes, technologies can kind of be adopted by producers, but the mechanism or the go-to market is extremely important. It all also needs to flow down from demand. If there is not demand enough for a certain kind of a produce, then the producer doesn't really have a long-term incentive to really change behavior.
That's a very good point, and I see your startup mind, investor mind in everything you say. So you mentioned something that gives us room to go to the second topic, which is collaboration. In this case, it's collaboration and the democratization of access to technology. Such a beautiful topic. So in your experience with the startups, how can the agritech startups collaborate with the farmers in the adoption of these new technologies? Is that something that they can do and teach the others, as you mentioned, education too, so that they benefit from these new technologies that they cannot access any other way?
So I think that's, if you look at any agritech startup in India which has scaled up, they have had to do it. There is no other way but to do trainings, to do pilots, to do because in India word of mouth sells really fast, right? I can go and try and sell an IoT sensor, but if my neighboring farmer already has it, I'll get convinced much more easily. So I think the point is, yes, if you look at any agri-tech company, there's a large part of quote-unquote sales, which is actually extension activities, right? So which is actually farmer extension. And the best thing is that if you can show it, if you can demonstrate it through a pilot, that is the best way of trickling down any new technology, as opposed to, because otherwise you need a practical proof of things to happen. Most companies have had to do it. There are, of course, now thankfully in some value chains there are farmer producer companies, farmer producer organizations, collectives, cooperatives, whatever. So which essentially helps aggregate the number of farmers together. So you have 200, 500 farmers coming together, and maybe the said demonstration or intervention can be done over a slightly bigger area. There are also so many, there's a lot of good work being done by a lot of foundations with their own kind of view, but essentially I look at all of their work as becoming another aggregate of farmers. Like I was talking to somebody from Pani Foundation, which is working in Maharashtra, focused around water, but essentially they work with a cluster of 200 to 300 farmers. Now that cluster could be used to demonstrate any other newer technologies which could be relevant for their other businesses as well, because farming essentially is a business, right? So
yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Subhadeep. So for Bhuvana and for Sharan, collaboration public and private partnership. So what can you tell us about that kind of collaboration in terms of the improvement of nutrition or global nutrition or food safety?
Well, to start with, very often when there is a conversation or when there are ideas around climate and agriculture, that largely looks at what are the kind of climate adaptation or resilience that we could build, and how do we look at yield, how do we look at livelihoods. But very often the conversation around nutrition doesn't come in. And one of the key things I would say around public-private partnerships is public is the platform through which we could achieve scale, because government partnerships, looking at policies, engaging with state and the central governments brings an opportunity to work at scale. Private partnerships is where the innovations happen. And very often, I think we are at a place in time where there is a lot of innovations that's happening, but a lot of them are in pilots. And quite a lot of them are looking to scale up. And that's where I feel that marriage between the public and the private engagement can really happen. And we do see that happening quite a bit in terms of some of the foundations works that's happening. For instance, in one of the southern states in India, they are intentionally moving towards agroecological practices in the production of some of their staple foods. So there is a lot that's happening in the production space, be it at a seed level intervention or at a soil level or at the agriculture practices. But there's a lot that can happen at the post-harvest level because we as a world produce enough food. But not everybody has access to that food that is produced, because 1/3 of it is either lost or wasted. So given that scenario, how do we, there are, like what we were talking about, the cold storages. Now that's such a basic intervention that can happen, which would not only reduce spoilage, but it would also ensure extended period of nutrition retention of the food. And that's such a small piece of intervention that you're looking at. And it's also a political mandate. Governments are formed because there is a commitment to farmers that we will create cold storage for you to promote your harvest. So that's the interface that I see, where you have innovations that have to talk to scale with governments for it to really be impactful, given 80 to 85% of our farmers are smallholder farmers. And I also want to sort of reiterate that when we talk of innovation, so when we talk of scale, the bottom line has to be very clearly identified, that what is the farmer going to get out of it? Because the onus for mitigating climate change should not be at the hands of a smallholder farmer. And that's where a public-private partnership really comes forward.
Perfect. Sharan? Any success stories you want to share? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. So I think we spoke a little bit about the post-harvesting processes, but I think a lot of the work that I do happens in the design phase, or when the projects are actually being grown. And I can talk about a recent project, which is a huge success story. Of course, it's not perhaps the best example for this audience, because we are speaking of Latin America, we are speaking of India. The example that I'm about to give you is one from the African continent, but it is an excellent one. So very recently, we were in the process of, submitting an RFP, a request for proposal, for a large client who needed carbon credits at the tune of about 500,000 over the next 10 years, which is a large demand. It's very, very difficult to fulfill this kind of a demand from smaller projects, from a lot of the projects that we typically tend to work with, because they are community-led. But in this case, we were approached by a project based out of Uganda. It's called Trees for Global Benefit, and I invite you all to please go and take a look at it. This project is built out of about 40,000 smallholder farms. It combined and aggregates all of these farms. They're community-led. It's a community-led initiative. all of these farms were aggregated, and then finally we were able to kind of pool all the carbon credits that came from all of these farms, and were able to submit this. And of course now it's in the process of being evaluated. We're hoping for the best. But I think the example that comes out of this is one, of course, that community-led farming is, it comes from the community. And then speaking to what was just said about the nutrition aspect, one big example that we saw come out of this project was the fact that because it was by the people themselves, a lot of what was being grown, a lot of what came out of the projects or of the farms were not commercial crops. They weren't crops that were being grown for sale. They were a lot of the farmers did, even who did subsistence farming, were in fact sequestering carbon on small fields. What they were growing was what they needed. And it was led by what their own nutritional demands were. We saw an increase in nutrition. We saw an increase in education around the project. We saw government involvement because there was such a large amount of their own citizens working on this project. And I think it was all in all a successful example of community of a community coming together to address their own needs. So, yeah.
Thank you. Such a beautiful story. So collaboration is key, right? So if we can go to Bhuvana, because I want her to address this fascinating topic, which is the link between agriculture and nutrition, which we tend to skip from our conversations. So I'm so happy to have you here. So I'll leave you some questions and you can elaborate and take your time to answer this, because I have a lot of questions for you, but I can only ask a few. So how the agricultural practices affect the quality and nutritional value of the food we produce? That's one thing I would like for you to address. And then malnutrition, what are the strategies in combating that? And then some words about the biofortification, because everyone's talking about that these days, and I would like your view on that.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, to start with, what's the linkage between agriculture and nutrition? I think if we sort of rewind 4 or 5 decades back, or even 7 or 8 decades back, the world, or specifically countries like India, were food insecure. So our focus was to produce more food so that everybody has access to basic staple foods. And I think at this point in time, at least for countries like India, we are a food secure nation to the extent that we export a lot of food, right? But is our food security equivalent to nutrition security? No, it's not. We are still more cereal-based, cereal-heavy, not a diverse plate. And if we're talking about food production, again, Subhadeep had a very good point to that. We're exporting water because what we are growing is very often very climate intensive, resource intensive food that we're working on. We sort of don't go back to our neglected or the traditional crops. With millets, there was a huge push that came in with the millets mission. There was a lot of food that was, there was a lot of push across the country to grow more and more varieties of millets. There were food, value chains. There were brands that were working exclusively on millets. So a lot of that happened. So going back to that connect of moving from food security to nutrition security is an intentional process, right? Because given the reality of climate change, the calamities affect how much food we produce or how much we, harvest we create every year. It also affects the nutritional content of that. For instance, as a result of climate change, they say there's going to be a drop of about 30% to 40% of wheat yield and about 20 to 30% of rice yield. And again, there's going to be loss in the micronutrient value. Now, all of that is going to affect access to food and access to the right kind of food. So there needs to be an intentional pivot towards how do we look at promoting nutritionally rich indigenous varieties like millets, and how there is access created to the consumption of such nutritional varieties, right? So that's a very truncated version of a linkage between agriculture and nutrition. In terms of malnutrition, again, what can we do to mitigate malnutrition from agricultural point of view? Multiple things that can happen right from the agri input level in terms of, again, I think respecting local cultural knowledge of what grows and what is consumed. There has to be, and there is no silver bullet, right? There has to be multiple points of intervention, right from what is being grown in terms of the seeds. So we could talk about biofortification. You can talk about traditional indigenous varieties being grown and consumed. You can talk about soil level intervention, looking at what is the micronutrient content of the soil. How do you, in agroecological ways, promote more micronutrients in the soil? Because what grows is basically the absorption of the nutrients from the soil. And of course, the post-harvest reduction of food loss and better storage and better food environment practices that reduces nutrient loss of the food. Now, these are some ways from an agriculture point of view we could look at addressing malnutrition, and of course having a diverse plate. Now, that's something that not a lot of us think about. Did we have 3 types of fruits? Did we have 5 types of vegetables in our last 24 hours? A lot of us don't. And we have access. We have the wherewithal to buy it. And so when we talk about people who might not be able to afford, that's where the access point of view also comes in. So, there's no simple answer to it. It's right. The entire food system approach. That way, that sort of helps us understand where is the food produced, how is the food produced, how does it travel to the plate, and what are the other overarching socio-cultural, economic factors that affect who gets access to consume the kind of food that we have. So unfortunately, I'm not giving you a very straightforward answer in this, but it's too complicated.
But you've done a great job enlightening us on such a complex topic, so thank you so much. So going to the next one, we go to Subhadeep. So food waste reduction and supply chain efficiency, that's our next topic. So any ideas on how we can have a supply chain more efficient?
So I think, again, coming at this from a agritech and startup perspective, what we've seen in the last decade and a half, I think most of the early wins have been around either disintermediation or kind of allowing technologies which can help you repurpose, which is a better word for maybe process more, if you can. Decentralized processing, I think in a country like India, is a very, very important thing that's a huge opportunity for entrepreneurs. I think there's enough and more kind of public support available as well. We don't need to, again, as I said, we don't need to transport moisture here and there. If we can actually process closer to the growing areas, if we can store more closer to the growing areas, which basically means creating smaller structures, smaller infrastructures, and having entrepreneurs run those kind of infrastructures, then it's just about scheduling and pooling those capacities, and we're good at tech, right, as a country, so we can do all of that pretty easily. In terms of, there's enough and more happening, I feel, around how do you enhance your shelf life of certain perishable products, whether it's fruits and vegetables, meat, fish, etc., in terms of edible coatings and all. But all of that, I think, still will need a 5 to 7 year window to see commercial scale. They've all, the bunch of technologies I've seen is either at a pre-commercial stage or at about to get finalized positions. But there's enough, I guess, availability of grants also, frankly, now with BIRAC and others, that is helping founders who come from scientific backgrounds attack these problems. The other aspect of, I think, food loss per se, I think nutrition loss is a bigger concern, if you ask me, than food loss. Food loss will get solved, right? There is from a technology perspective, there is not going to be any major disadvantage which India has in the next 5 years. Then it will be about implementing those at scale, the right way to go, the right aggregation, the right financial incentives, and so on and so forth, the right consumer demand, and how do you also link health to food. I think today we are in a situation where health and medicine are kind of correlated, but that movement from, if you can eat healthier, then you can avoid a lot of medicine. I think that journey in the demand side, in the consumer side, needs to come up. That's where I think private citizens, corporations, everyone has to play a role. But that will automatically enable technologies to get cheaper. I think what I'm trying to say is that demand dictates a lot of these changes again, in the supply chain, in the value chain, in adoption. So it's not the dearth of new technologies there. It will be more about how do you take them to a broader producer group, which is of course price sensitive, and also on the consumer side, we are a price sensitive country, right? So I'll give you an example. We've invested in a company called Sid's Farm, which is a clean dairy company which makes milk and dairy products. Now their promise is very simple. They're saying that, and milk, by the way, in India is the largest producer of milk in the world, but we also adulterate a lot, right? So they're basically saying, listen, our milk is adulteration free, it's antibiotic free. Just those two claims. I am not promising A2, I'm not promising A1, I'm not promising organic. But I'm promising this is antibiotic free and there is no adulteration. And whatever protein content I am claiming is backed by enough lab tests. So they test every single batch of milk which comes. Now you can't replicate that maybe very, very fast. But you can definitely do it slowly, farm by farm, entrepreneur by entrepreneur, and that's kind of how they've scaled. So these businesses take longer to scale. They require more patient capital to scale. But the advantage is that business in 8 years, it has such a loyal base of customers in one small city, in one metro, Hyderabad, that you can basically go and ask anyone, they would have heard about it and they would be a consumer, right? And the fact that this is not 2x in terms of price to your regularly available milk, I think is more critical. So in India, mass premium works with a 5 to 10% delta. So if you tell me that this is wonderful milk for you, it's the best quality milk, but it costs you 2x, even somebody in this room will think twice about purchasing it. But if it's 5% more, if it's 10% more, that is basically the sweet spot for businesses to aspire to hit. And again, as I said, there'll be a segment which drinks organic milk. Great, it's available. There will be a segment which wants just clean food, right? That is, I think, where the market will really kind of move now.
Oh, that's a wonderful example. Thank you so much. And finally, it comes to an end. Final question, final topic, it's regulation. So each of you, just 1 minute to share with us what you think are the most important barriers regarding regulation to implement this sustainable and healthy agribusiness that we have been talking about during the panel. Any ideas? Maybe your wishes?
Okay, so question is around the challenges in implementing this at scale. Is that, yeah? Regulatory challenges, okay. I would say the biggest challenge would be rollout of regulations, right? There is a lot. I mean, we're looking at sustainable agriculture in the Ministry of Agriculture. There is a perspective on building climate resilience. There is a perspective on building sustainable natural farming practices. But how do you translate that into action, right? And India it's a massive country, right? Each state is a country in itself. So I would say more than the rollout of regulatory prescriptions or recommendations is the biggest challenge. And everything is for the long haul. It's going to take time because we're talking changing practices which are so deep-rooted, and we learn from each other. As farmers, there's a cohort where they have shared learning. So if you want to introduce something different, that's going to take a lot of time for things to really be implemented. So patience is the virtue, I guess.
Thank you, Bhuvana. Subhadeep?
So I think, again, there's one approach where you can continuously blame policymakers for not being active, but the other approach is to participate more in policy making and regulation. I think the second approach works really well. And I'll give you an example, maybe slightly off topic. The whole use of drones, let's say in agriculture, right? Hotly debated, pros, cons, all of us in this room understand. But there is a need. There is a need because there is dearth of labor. Labor does not want to use small knapsack sprayers where the pesticide hit comes to their own face. Even farmers don't want to use that. And there are areas, despite being a very populated country, agricultural labor shortage exists in the country. So I think, while it took its own time, there was a very consultative approach which was taken to understand the pros and cons of how drone spraying will work, who will be a pilot, how can they be trained, how can they be from the local economy itself, so that it becomes like an aspirational career choice for a lot of people who are in the villages. It also kind of then stops migration to that extent. And then how can we provide these equipments to them in a way which they can pay out as they earn, right? So multiple things had to be solved for while taking care of safety regulations. So it took its own 3-4 year time, but now that it's rolled out, I think the public sector, private corporations, entrepreneurs, everyone is kind of rallying towards using it where it's required. So just another way where newer technologies, different use cases, drones have been used for surveillance for a very long time, but in agriculture, a limited use case of that required some policy interventions, but it was very consultative. This is one because we were very close to the process. And I think that is the approach which has to be taken with regulation, right? You cannot sit out and point that regulation is not helping me. That doesn't work.
Okay, thank you, Subhadeep. Sharan, finally, final words?
Yeah, I think I was going to mostly say regulatory challenges, policy challenges, but maybe I can build a little bit upon that. So we've of course heard that there is some behavioral resistance from the farmers, from the community, but in my experience with all the global projects that we work with, I've seen projects from small areas, from rural areas in Latin America, rural farms in India, to big, large-scale projects in the US, large-scale projects in Europe. And primarily the challenges that I've witnessed have, of course, one, been policy gaps, which we did address already. But often we find that there are policy gaps in sustainable farming incentives that inhibit people from uptaking such practices. Then, of course, we've seen that for interested participants, there are very lengthy and complex certification processes.
Yes.
There are barriers to obtaining, say, regenerative farming certificates. And then, of course, there's a lack of awareness, there's a lack of education. Without being able to speak to smallholders on the ground, without educating them on what the way to get to such practices is, we sit here, I think, in our glass houses. We expect that they should know, that they should learn, because we say that that's where emissions come from. But one example that I give, I've been fortunate enough to have studied outside India, and a lot of people, my peers, students that I've been with, have often said that, oh, but India is one of the highest emitters in the world. That's because of the fact that, of course, we come from, we're a very young country. We come we came 75 years ago from 200 years of British rule, and we're still very much coming out of the British Raj. They left us potentially, without getting too controversial, in a position where where Indians didn't know for the longest time where our next meal was coming from. So to come onto the ground and then say that we should come in with, say, carbon crediting programs, sustainable farming initiatives, certification, regenerative agriculture, it's a bit of a utopian idea. When there are so many barriers that stand in the way. Even right now, there are so many of our trade policies that favor the industrial production that comes from those times. So I think, of course, we can't be bystanders. We can't say that we should expect that all policy change happens without us. But that being said, we do need to also hold our lawmakers, we need to hold them accountable, and we need to expect that there should be some policy reform that includes the smallholders, that includes the people where our food comes from. We should include the people on the ground and create this policy reform, address these policy gaps, limit their high upfront costs, the limited infrastructure that they have, build upon that, address their technical knowledge gaps, and actually aid them in joining us in this path towards a more sustainable, resilient, and climate-resistant future.
And she is Sharan, new generation. It's beautiful to hear
Gen Z.
someone so young speaking so much truth. So thank you so much to our panel. Thank you for your insights and perspectives. It was such a luxury for me to have this panel of experts. It was a learning experience for me and I guess for all the audience. So thank you and a big round of applause to them. We invite you to take a picture here. Picture, yes. Thank you. All the gifts are from Indian winners. Yes, please.
I thank you all for this very engaging discussion on the transformative potential of the intersection of agriculture, nutrition, and sustainability in addressing the climate crisis. There couldn't be a more relevant time for such a vital discussion in our country. Well, as we move towards the evening, we will now be hearing from our esteemed guests who have been so kind as to join us here today. I would like to now introduce Mr. Badruddin Khan. Mr. Khan currently serves as Director PSSS and Welfare Officer at the Rajya Sabha Secretariat, where he plays a pivotal role in ensuring the smooth and efficient functioning of India's upper house of parliament. Over his distinguished career, he has held several key positions that showcase his depth of experience and proficiency in governance and administration. Previously, he served as the Private Secretary to the Governor of Manipur, where he was instrumental in managing high-level engagements, streamlining communication and coordinating between the Governor's office and various stakeholders. Additionally, he held the role of Secretary at the India Islamic Cultural Center, a prestigious institution committed to fostering cultural, educational and social development. Sir, I welcome you on the dais.
Thank you, Parul Bhai. I was initially told to introduce my senior, my idol, Mr. Salman Khurshid, but I will definitely speak something about the Latin American countries, Indian-Latin relations, and my experiences with them. At the outset, I welcome the guests from Latin American countries coming to India. We are here for you. You are our guest. Anything we can do, we are here with open arms and open heart. Thank you so very much visiting India. We need to have much more such exchanges. Diplomacy plays a very important role, but prior to that, culture and economic ties are very important. So we need to reach out to the people through culture, through economic exchanges, doing the business, and then the diplomacy plays its own role. They have their parameters, but culture has no boundaries. So let us strengthen our relation through culture and economic ties. I was part of many parliamentary delegations and happened to be in Cuba, in Brazil, in Mexico, in Panama, and many other countries. What I felt was that we need to strengthen the economic ties much more what we have today. India is master in many fields, be it IT, be it human resources, quality mines, and Latin America has its own strength. We already doing a cooperation in the field of crude oil, edible oil, and India is advising a lot of IT-related businesses there. We need to enhance it, and the question is how to enhance it. The easy way is that we need to have much more delegations through PhD Chamber of Commerce, FICCI, people-to-people contact, parliamentary delegations, and then we can ask the government to, to create an environment having the ease of business. So this is what basically I feel. And Latin America is naturally very rich. They have huge natural resources. And India is a vast country, is a huge country, growing well. And our growth rate is going up every year. We need to come together to make it better. So these are my views about Indian Latin American relations. Not going deep into it, but I feel that such exchanges play a major role and it should be enhanced. Coming to the second point, which I was told about my idol, Mr. Salman Khurshid, who is here. He is a known personality, and it is difficult to describe an ocean. So he's a big man, and I had an opportunity to work with him when he was Minister of Minority Affairs, and he was Minister of External Affairs. He comes from a very prominent political family. His father was a cabinet minister, very prominent congressman. He himself is a tall Congress leader. He has recently been elected as president of India Islamic Center, where I was secretary during the last tenure, and we had a great relation with Mr. Parul Soni to augment the finances for our social initiatives. So he initially helped us. I'll request Salman Bhai to engage Parul Soni Saab to have we have a little financial crunch for our social initiatives. So if you can rope in him, because he's been helping us. He was with us when I was in the Ministry of Minority Affairs. We augmented 400 crores of rupees for the scheme called Nai Manzil, for which I was in charge. So such brains are required for not only for doing the business, but for the social causes also. Salman Bhai is here. We need to listen to him, his views about Indo-Latin American relations. I think it's time for me to go. Thank you so very much for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.
Sir has already very beautifully introduced you, but for everyone else who's joining us from other countries, Salman Khurshid sir is an Indian politician, lawyer and writer with a distinguished career in public service. He began his political journey in the early 1980s as an officer on special duty in the Prime Minister's office under late Indira Gandhi. He later served as Deputy Minister of Commerce and Minister of State for External Affairs, while representing the Farrukhabad constituency in Uttar Pradesh. Re-elected in 2009 as a Member of Parliament for the Indian National Congress, he held key ministerial positions including Corporate Affairs, Minority Affairs, Water Resources, Law and Justice, and Foreign Affairs. Beyond politics, he is the president of the India Islamic Cultural Center and has been associated with institutions like the Delhi Public School Society. A prolific writer, he has authored books on Indian politics, history, and society, including Beyond Terrorism, New Hope for Kashmir, and The Other Side of the Mountain. An alumnus of St. Stephen's College, Delhi, and St. Edmund Hall, Oxford, he also taught at Trinity College, Oxford. Sir, I would now request you to take the dais. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Badruddin Saab, for your introduction. Possibly reduce the time that you should have had for yourself to expand on some of the subjects that you're familiar with. But let me just say that I am delighted to be, after many, many months, at a gathering where Latin America is very strongly represented. I had the good fortune during my years as foreign minister to travel through Latin America and possibly to every single country in Latin America. And I was amazed with the energy that one saw amongst the young people of Latin America. There's a lot of talk about the aspirant youth of India, and how much difference these young people can make, and how responsible we are to ensuring that we provide them with all that is required of a young, budding life. But the energy that I saw in Latin America is something that has left a deep mark on my memory. And surprisingly, it wasn't about any major institution. It wasn't about the best practices in farming or industry. I would, with candor, admit that the deepest memory that was left was in what was called group dancing in the nightclubs that they had, in which people danced at one time. Something like 5,000 young kids danced at the same time, and they knew how and when at what stroke to actually turn completely 180 degrees, etc. I tried to emulate that, but I'm sorry I wasn't very successful. But I saw them also as the best motorcyclists. I mean, I've seen motorcyclists in our country here, but the motorcyclists that I saw there amongst young people was quite amazing. So Latin America was superb and fantastic. And let me just tell you, because we are sharing it here as one large human family, but one of my best moments in Latin America were also my meeting with, of all people, Fidel Castro. There was a 28-year-old foreign minister for Cuba, with whom I struck a very nice relationship to begin with. And he was a member of the Cuban Youth Brigade, etc. And one day he said that one day he got a call from the Prime Minister, the President's office, saying the President wants to see you. And so he said, now I was wondering what that would be. And when I actually reached Fidel Castro, he said, I want you to suggest a successor for yourself. And I thought, my God, this is the end of my career, right? I mean, how do you tell Fidel that I'm not going to oblige? So I said, give me a couple of days, I'll come back with a good name. And I didn't even have the courage to say, and what would happen to me? So I came home and I agonized over what was going to happen to me. And then I sent the name of my successor. But before my successor was announced, I was announced as the foreign minister of Cuba. And he was 28 years old, only 28 years old. And I was obviously much older than I must have been 50 or 52, but he was only 28 years old. And so we started off, and we started off very well. And I said to him, please, can you, Minister, can you just do me one favor? Can I get to see Fidel Castro? And he said, yeah, this is Cuba. Anything can happen. So I said, oh, that's wonderful. So I'm going to get a meeting with Fidel Castro. One day passed, and they showed me all the farms, and they showed me industry, and they showed me all the performances, etc. And next day I said, Minister, I'm still waiting to have a meeting with Fidel Castro. And he said, this is Cuba, anything can happen. And I thought, my God, what is this, anything can happen? And this went on for 3 days. And then finally he invited me to dinner. On the last night that I was there, I was catching a flight at about 10:30 or 11 o'clock. And his house was very close to the airport. So he said, you can go from my house after dinner, you can go straight to the airport and then fly back to India. And then sort of somewhat reluctantly I said, but you know, you know that you promised me that I would be able to meet with Fidel Castro. And he said, yeah, this is Cuba, anything can happen. I said, can't take that anymore. I can't take that anymore. Let's go and have dinner. So while we were at dinner, we were enjoying this massive roast, etc., etc. It was a wonderful evening. So at one point I said, now for the last time, Minister, last time I'm going to ask you, is there a chance that I meet Fidel Castro? I knew that I was going to the airport, so there was no chance of meeting Fidel Castro. And he said, well, of course. I mean, this is Cuba. Anything can happen. And I said, I'm not really convinced that anything can happen. He said, well, then just look behind you and see what there is. And I sort of turned around and looked behind, and there was Fidel Castro smoking his cigar. And so we then sat down, and he asked me, and I'll tell you why I'm telling you this story. He sat down and he told me about his relationship with Indira Gandhi and all the people that he'd met in this country. And then he said, you know anything about farming? And now, an Indian politician never says he doesn't know anything about farming. So I said, yes, of course I do. And he said, well, how much rice does 1 acre produce in India? And I said, you think I can get back to you on that? I can't be telling. Then he said, what about sugarcane? Now, how much sugar do you get out of so much sugarcane? And I said, please, you got to spare me. I will send back all these questions. I will send back answers to all these. But I'm not quite sure about any of these things. But I can talk about anything else that you want to discuss and so on. And I'm saying this because when I came here and I looked at the brief that you had prepared for me, and I said, my God, this is all very technical stuff. I am in law now, and I practice law from morning to evening, which is why I requested you that I would come in the afternoon. But where are all the statistics and figures, and what are the trade balances, etc., that we can talk about? And I'm sure there were so many experts here who could talk about all that. But I thought that I would do two things. I would, one, tell you another story that makes my job a little easier. And that story is, I don't know if you in Latin America have heard of a remarkable raconteur of tales from not from Latin America, but from Central Asia, a chap called Mullah Nasruddin. He is part of the folklore of our country, but he's actually from Uzbekistan, from Tashkent, etc. And there are lovely stories about him. And one time he has written that he was asked to come and speak to people who were well informed and really very, very clear about what they had to say. So he got there and he was very ill prepared, as I am, and he said, ladies and gentlemen, do you know what I'm going to say? And everybody said, no, we are waiting. We don't know what you're going to say. And he said, it's my principle that I don't speak to people who don't know what I'm going to say, and off I'm going. And so he left. People were very, very taken aback. So they called him back the following week and said, now let's see. So he got up and said, so now you know what I'm going to say. And everybody said, of course we know what you're going to say. And he said, good, then why should I say it? And off he went. So everybody said, this is not going to be accepted. We're going to bring him back. Half of us will say we know. The other half will say we don't. And we must force him to say something. So he was called back the third time. And he looked at everyone and said, so you know what I'm going to say? And everyone, half of them said, yeah, we do. The other half said, sorry, we don't. So he said, that's good. So those who know will please tell those who don't. And my job is done. I don't have to say anything at all. Now, I would imagine that you are such a gathering. Not only is that half of you know and half don't, but actually all of you know. All of you know that you can only just tell the others what they already know and what you already know. But I want to say something because you're talking about themes which are extremely important to this entire ecosystem of economics and of trade and of business. That you are in a very remarkable place in this country. And all the wonderful stories you heard about us are true, and they are fascinating. And we revel in those stories, and we like to tell those stories. But we have a very serious problem about those stories as well. And I want you to know, because if you know that, you can, in due course, address us with what you think are the answers. And you could certainly factor this in when you're talking about what kind of relationship we can have with Latin America. And I'm very glad that there are so many ladies present here. And that Latin America is also taking an upfront role as far as ladies are concerned. I've seen the President of Mexico giving it back, as it were, to the President of the United States, despite losing some geographical descriptions and so on and so forth. But this is great. But you've come to a country that puts a big question mark on anything to do with statistics. And I'm saying this for one reason. We have to strengthen our statistics systems. And I'm sure the economists will tell you this, that there are problems about our statistics, etc. But we have a workable level of statistics. But if you are really interested in statistics, please look at the newspapers and media coverage of what is happening in my state of Uttar Pradesh, which is 300 kilometers or 400 kilometers away from here, and where the largest gathering of human beings ever on earth, are meeting. And every basic idea of sustainability that you and I are familiar with is under stress and challenge. But we have to be extremely politically correct and sensitive about the intent and about the aspirations and about the commitment of people who are going there. This is the 144 years. This event happens once in 144 years. And anybody who's anything and everybody is going to go and take a dip in the river Ganges. Look at the number of zeros amongst people who are going to the river Ganges, and within a limited period of 2 months, is something that I've lost sight of, and I think everybody's lost sight of. We've had tragedies there. We've had stampedes. We've had problems and issues. We had a stampede at the railway station in Delhi. But it's just the passion and commitment that people have for salvation, for saving themselves from anything evil, that is persuading them to go there. And it is a solemn duty of the country and the government of the day and everybody else who's involved in public life and policy to ensure that people go there safely and in comfort. But something that we will not say publicly, but something that concerns us is that when you are talking about sustainability and you're talking about cleaning up rivers and when you're talking about having water and air subjected to regulation, what do you do when you have a country the size of India and a population the size of India that puts all regulations aside when it comes to faith, when it comes to religion? And this is something that happens elsewhere in the world too, and I'm sure that it happens in parts of Latin America. I mean, Woodstock was one large gathering where people went for music, but it was nothing. It was a drop in the ocean compared to the how many we are able to and we have to address when they come to Prayagraj or Allahabad for a dip in the river. There is an annual Hajj visit from all over the world when people converge on Makkah and Medina for performing Hajj. But again, nowhere near the size that we have to put up. So every time you talk of India, you have to keep in mind two things. And I thought that I will flag them for you. One is the size, huge size, unimaginable size. And therefore, when you say that India is an emerging economy, right, the size gives us qualification for being an emerging economy, being one of the top few in the world. Undoubtedly. But that emerging feeling is available to every single Indian, and the answer is no, because of the size of our population. When will we be able to ensure that what we can do at the fringes and the edges and the cutting edges will be available to the masses in our country? And on everything that I heard in the last discussion and everything you said about agriculture, what you said about produce, what you said about regulation, etc., is something that stares us in the face every day, because, and I'll give you some examples. Look at both issues of environment and hygiene. We have the best practices of the world that you will find when you go to buy a hamburger not too far away from here. We have the best practices, the best regulation, the best restriction, scrutiny, inspections, etc., the best. But you just have to travel 10 kilometers or 15 kilometers out towards my state of Uttar Pradesh and stop by any little marketplace, and you would find a meat shop in which the meat will be sold hanging from hooks out in the open. And you wonder that somebody had to close down a restaurant because one or two flies were found in those restaurants. And they had to close down for 6 months or for a year, etc., at huge losses, when flies have an open invitation 10 kilometers away, right? And it's easy to say, well, impose the same regulation on them. It's easy to say that. But can we socially and politically succeed in enforcing those regulations? And that's about building houses, it's about using road culverts, it's about where you sleep, where you beg, where you go, etc. So the challenge in India is that we have the cutting edge of technology, but we also have a big drag of people who are desperate to be engaged, involved, and accommodated and absorbed in whatever the best of our people are being able to do. So we have the best law schools. Let me talk about law schools. We have the finest law schools in the world. There is nothing more that we can learn except come across people from different countries if we go abroad to do an LLM or do something else. And yet we have thousands of colleges from which people come out who are completely innocent about law. They are students of law, but they are completely innocent about law. And then, unlike elsewhere in the world, from the first day that they get their law degree, they want to go and argue in the Supreme Court. No lesser court. It has to be the Supreme Court. These are challenges. Now, often when we are being truthful, and maybe I would not have said many of these things if I was still holding office, but because I'm not holding office, I'm a lawyer, I have freedom to say these things. And our saying these things becomes a problem with our media. It becomes a problem with our media. We are very sensitive about our media. By the way, somebody who made some what were called obscene remarks on their Facebook, their Supreme Court has protected them from arrest today. At least they've been, when I was coming here, I saw the Supreme Court has said they're not to be touched. Now, that's important. That Supreme Court can intervene for something of this nature, and we may disagree as to what the person said and did was obscene or acceptable, socially acceptable, etc. Not we may disagree, but the point is we have disagreed from the days of Lady Chatterley's lover. We've disagreed about the content of what somebody says and so on. But here I thought the general impression was that Indian ethos and Indian culture doesn't really allow for something like this to be said. But on the other hand, a serious student of law will tell you Indian culture also doesn't allow you to arrest people for everything that they do. And there may be other ways of imposing sanction, but surely not by putting them behind the incarceration doors, etc. So this is the mystery, and this is the conundrum, and this is the internal contradiction of Indian society, which you don't always see. But we have a problem which we need to be resolved. I've seen in South Africa, I've seen farms, for instance. I've been to farms where you need to get onto a vehicle to go from one part of the farm to another part of the farm. I've seen fantastic things like bees being bred and kept so that they can pollinate the vines of beans, etc., and so on and so forth, which are then finally exported to the European destinations. And I've seen they're using little compartments in which they keep a special beetle that destroys, when it's let out into the strawberry fields, it goes and destroys those little insects that destroy strawberry, right? I've seen that, and it works so beautifully. It works on computers. Everybody knows what's happening where. I'm not sure that we have many places where we can show showcase something like this in India. There are many places. There are some wonderful places. You talked about dairy products just now. There are some fantastic dairy products, projects, etc. that are available. But then we also have our gaushalas, about which we are embarrassed that the poor cows don't get enough food because man eats the food that the cow is to eat, and therefore the cow doesn't get enough food. Why does that happen? So there are some organizational, systemic problems which we cannot overlook when we are looking at the wonderful plan about things that India and Latin America can do together and things that India and the world can do together. So it's like being on an Indian road. You have a Ferrari, you have a beautiful SUV, you have a motorcycle, but there is somewhere a rickshaw also plodding along, and periodically the policeman will come and say, you can't go here, you can't go there, you get off the road, etc. But where does the poor guy go? Where does the poor rickshaw puller go if he's pushed off the road? Right? We never planned enough in the past to say that there will be, like China has, that there will be need for a road for bicyclists and for rickshaw pullers, etc. They were able to do it, and they seem to have space, but we don't have space. So we make a special road for them in which we get people to walk and we get the rickshaws to run and the cyclists to come, etc., etc. So I'm only saying that we have some problems and we have work cut out for us which we need to deal with. But the important decision that this country took was that we cannot wait to go to the cutting edge of technology till we solve all these problems. So we said we'll solve these problems as we go along. But meanwhile, there is something to do and we will do it, which is why you're here today, why everybody is gathered today. And I hope we continue at the cutting edge of technology and the cutting edge of entrepreneurship and enterprise. But do please keep a thought in your minds for how do we resolve some of the endemic issues and problems of Indian society. I've not even touched upon those issues which are of a social nature. We need to solve them as well. Divisiveness between us. We were told, Amartya Sen told us that we were the argumentative Indians, right? Which is now a pretty anodyne thing, because we are no longer just argumentative Indians. We are aggressive and violent Indians. And how do we reverse that process? To cherish the dream that we were given by Mahatma Gandhi, which is the dream of being a truly peaceful, prosperous nation, where we loved each other, where our outreach to everybody, not just of Indian descent, but of people from the world, was a vision and a dream that Mahatma Gandhi gave us. So I want to stop there and thank Latin America for showing to me 1,000 places in Latin America, down to the absolute edge of Latin America in the south, near the Antarctic, where you would find a statue of Mahatma Gandhi. I mean, if someone has shown us what it means to cherish, value, and celebrate Mahatma Gandhi, is Latin America, and thank you very much. Thank you very much for doing that for us. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Okay?
Sir, I thank you on behalf of our organizers and our participants for sharing your stories, experiences, and thoughts with us today and being a part of this gathering. You have indeed given us all something to think about and understand.